Hi, this is your Sapnil Bhartiya, and we are here at Open Source Summit in Denver, Colorado. And once again, we have with us CRob or Christopher Robinson, Chief Security Architect for OpenSSF. CRob, it's great to have you back on the show in person.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. First of all, let's start talk about your role at OpenSSF.
Absolutely. My job predominantly is I remove blockers for the community. I help them go fast. So if they need technical assistance, they need resources from the Linux Foundation, I help make connections for them. I help promote our projects. And as the architect, I help, like right now with our security baseline project, I'm actually helping kind of write the system reference architecture for that and how folks can implement it.
You and I have talked about
have?
CRA actually when CRA was introduced, and that was also the time the Linux Foundation, announced LF Europe as well.
Yes.
A lot of discussion was going on. The intentions without CRA are great, but the way bureaucracy works and the way interaction with the community, businesses, that is where some conflict was there.
Yes.
But I think you folks and other foundations collaborated to work together to improve things.
Correct.
So for those who may not know what CRA is, if you can just quickly give a brief what CRA is,
Absolutely.
then we'll talk about what it means, for developers or businesses. But let's just give them overview of what is CRA.
Right. So the CRA is the Cyber Resilience Act. It's a new law in Europe that'll go into effect in December of 2027. And it predominantly is focused on protecting consumers of, the term is products with digital elements. So think about laptops and phones or Wi-Fi routers or apps that might be on a phone. So it's designed to protect consumers that if they're damaged through like a security breach, if their information's exposed, the law provides them recourse to get some compensation for that. And it really focuses in on secure software development practices, concepts like secure by design, secure by default, and also really hammers home the need to have very rigorous vulnerability management and vulnerability disclosure practices.
When CRA was, of course, introduced, there was a lot of course, misinformation, a lot of confusion. For businesses, it's totally okay, because they do have a lot of, but developers were worried, that I am just developing this code in my free time as, as a service to the community, right? That's what most of Linus created kernel for that purpose. And even now he is doing it out of, so they were worried that suddenly we cannot. And also the problem with open source is that we don't even know who is using it. The nature of it is.
Exactly.
So we have discussed that part in depth. I want to focus on businesses who are leveraging open source, and as the full foundation of free software, you can sell the code. So when it comes to open source, businesses and CRA, how do businesses make sure that they are fully, CRA ready?
There's a lot to do, unfortunately, and thankfully we still have a little bit of a runway. Some of the requirements come online in, I believe it's October of 2026, but the full law goes into effect in 27. There's quite a lot they need to do, but fortunately, as a cybersecurity practitioner, the law, there really isn't anything new in it. This is all things we've seen in other legislation around the world or part of things like the NIST Secure Software Development Framework. So if you work in a regulated industry, you probably are already doing a lot of what you need to do. And there's just some small adjustments you need to make around reporting. And there's some really strict timelines. But predominantly, all organizations need to be doing very thorough due diligence and risk management around all their components. That could be hardware parts that they put together. They might sell you a TV or a phone or a talking dog toy. So you need to understand like the hardware, the firmware, and the software, where all of that comes from. And ideally, you have some kind of relationship with that creator. And for open source, as you mentioned, generally an upstream maintainer doesn't have a clear understanding of who their downstream is, who uses them. And that's where, again, the law puts the burden of responsibility onto the manufacturer, that they need to have these connections with upstream open source projects, because the timelines, like when there's a vulnerability, so if there's a vulnerability discovered that's being actively exploited, the organization has to notify the European Commission within 24 hours that they know about it. And then there's other timelines that they need to have an advisory or a workaround, and then a final fix within a matter of 2 weeks to a month, depending on what the scenario is. So if the manufacturer doesn't understand like where they got this component, where they got this library or this whatever it might be, and they need to get it fixed, there are some very severe consequences, like for breaking the law, up to like 2.5% of your last year's total global revenue potentially for each infraction. So it's in their best interest to understand where they got the software, how those projects operate, and are they actively patching or not? And if they're not, how is that manufacturer going to get a fix so that they can get the fix out to their customers?
How much open source developers should worry about it, or the onus of responsibility has very clearly, there is no vagueness shifted to businesses, because I have had a lot of discussion, and sometimes the confusion is also like, if you're a developer, I'm creating some, but I'm getting a sponsorship for the project. So just because some transaction is happening, does that make me liable, or it is only that I am offering as a service to you?
So I'm going to give you my standard security answer. It depends. There actually are stipulations in the law that talk about if you receive monetary funds, and you're making a profit, you potentially fall into that manufacturer category where you have the full burden of obligations. And that's where a lot of this is being worked out. We and other foundations are working with the commission and the expert groups to help provide some guidelines and guidance to developers to understand, yes, if you get paid for support and you don't make a profit, chances are you don't have any obligations directly. But that's not going to mean that downstream isn't going to continue to harass you and nag you for updates or documentation or software bills of materials. But the project itself is not necessarily obliged to. But if you are taking compensation, that's where it gets gray. I would definitely consult with a lawyer. Or if you're part of a foundation like Linux Foundation or Apache or Eclipse, that fall in the category of stewards, and they have the ability to provide some protections and have some resources to help individual maintainers. But yeah, it's a fuzzy area, and you really need to be very clear and crisp about if you're taking money, kind of what that purpose is, and does it just cover your expenses, or are you making a profit?
How is OpenSSF working with these companies to ensure, to build some practices? Also, I don't know how many eons ago you folks have a badging system, CII also. Right. So, and things have evolved over time. So how are you helping businesses to ensure they have right practices in place, right processes in place, so they are less worried about getting fined, but rather more interested in building right processes?
And the intention of the law is that, the manufacturer is obliged to follow it and they have the penalties. But the intention is they actually engage with upstream and support them, provide them infrastructure, do testing, contribute code, contribute engineers. But to help support manufacturers, we've done several things. First off, we created a free course, LFE 1001. It's about a 90-minute class. And whether you're a developer, you're a manufacturer, or like me, you're a steward, you represent like a foundation, we have guidance that tells you what the specifics of the law are and how it pertains to you. So first off, manufacturers all should take this class and understand kind of what the law is, how it works, and what they need to do. Beyond that, we absolutely have tools like the best practices badge, the scorecard, and now the open source security baseline. And with these, the baseline especially, which is powered by both the scorecard and the badges. So if you've done the badges or done scorecard, you already have completed parts of the baseline. But the baseline is like a checklist. These are expected practices that any software project should do and should have, whether it's closed source or open source. And it's all kind of mom and apple pie, kind of foundational AppSec 101 stuff. You should have on anytime you're committing code to the main branch, you should have 2 people review it and sign off on it. You should use multi-factor authentication for the maintainers to protect themselves from identity theft and attacks. So it's just this long checklist, and ideally, the upstream projects will start to adopt it, and we're taking some moves there with our LFX tool within the Linux Foundation, where we're actually actively scanning several thousand projects today, and we're looking on trying to scan upwards of millions by the end of the year and show you kind of how close to the baseline these projects hew, like how closely they're following the practices. And even then, we've done training around, like if you're a product security team within a manufacturer, there are very specific things you need to do around vulnerability management. So we kind of lay that out and kind of give you some advice on processes you need to have in place and kind of point you to resources, organizations like the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams first, where they do a lot of PCERT and CCERT stuff. And we kind of route you over there. You need to have an established security team and to be able to manage this. So we have a lot of training. We have some tools. Baseline especially, we're going to have tools for attestation. So if you, part of the law requires, if the commission asks manufacturer, can I have a software bill of materials for your product? We have tools to be able to, identify if your components have those and where they are and where they tampered with or not. And that way that can help you as you're assembling your obligations to the commission.
Open source is kind of almost become the de facto way of writing code,
Absolutely.
It's no longer, a niche, which also means that it doesn't really matter whether you're a large organization or small organizations. Everybody, no matter what you're doing, you are pulling in some. So when I was listening to you, it looks like there's a lot of work to be done, Big businesses can do that. They have resources, even if they will have their own internal, small businesses, boutiques, they just want to set up this small, business for that. It could be too much overwhelming for them.
It can be, yes.
So what are you folks doing to lower that barrier where they don't look at it, we have to deal with another bureaucracy. And this bureaucracy is not simply as filing taxes. It can really, as you said, the amount of fine you have to pay will be huge. So what you are also doing, to kind of lower the barrier of entry for smaller businesses, they can also ensure that they are CRA ready without having to worry too much about it.
And what the advice I would give those organizations, smaller ones, first off, any contribution upstream helps, whether it's just participating and listening, giving a developer feedback, fixing typos in documentation, writing some tests. So you don't have to be the largest corporations on the planet to help upstream maintainers. But as any manufacturer is selecting components that they're going to sell for money to a consumer, they need to understand that they need to select high quality software. And that's where things like the badges or scorecard and now baseline help show you these things. This software was written in a way that is friendly for enterprises and meets those kind of compliance style requirements. So that even though the upstream maintainer might not have the obligation, it's still their software meets the intent of secure by design or whatever you're trying to do. So ideally, it will show you that this project has evidence that they are doing these types of things. And if they aren't, we have templates. That if you need, one of the requirements is you have to have a security policy. Well, we have templates that a project can just copy, edit to whatever they want it to say, and then pop. They have set the expectations for anyone using their software, what somebody can expect for patches and responses. And for smaller organizations, we also just recently released a global cyber skills education matrix. So we worked with our partners over in LF Education, and we've basically broke down IT jobs into 14 categories. And we broke down each job, so like a DBA or an SRE or an architect. So we have these job families, and in each job family, we have 3 levels of maturity or capability. So beginner, intermediate, and expert. And for each of these levels, we give you recommended security skills that you should have. So as a security architect, you should be able to do threat modeling and attack surface analysis. So we say, at a level 1 security architect, you need to have these skills. And we're now in the stage where we're trying to identify authoritative content to say, okay, we say you need this skill, this experience. Well, here's how to get it. Whether it's a free LF class, or maybe it's something over at OWASP or SANS or ISC2. So we're trying to identify where people can get these experiences. So small organizations ideally can very quickly upskill their developers, their DBAs, their project managers. Everybody needs to have a role in security, and everybody needs to have some level of security understanding.
Also, I think in general, it may be good for even small businesses, because if because of your code a company gets compromised, not only you have lost your reputation, you have lost your business. Second is that if I am starting a business as electrician, I need to get certified. I cannot even work on a building because it will not, the county will not even approve it. So I think overall it's a very good very which should be there either way, just because of that. Now I also want to ask is that is it applicable only to companies who are registered and operate in Europe, or is it about any company who serves people in Europe, or European companies who are serving? So it's
So broadly, the law is protecting European consumers. So yes, if you're a manufacturer in the EU, you're absolutely in scope. But Europe is the third largest economic market on the planet. So everybody around the globe really wants to sell their products there. Honda wants to sell their cars there. Samsung wants to sell TVs and refrigerators. So everybody wants to sell in Europe because there's, it's a great market. So if you are selling something to European citizens and it's a good, it's either a piece of hardware or it's some software. Now it doesn't, the things like cloud services like Gmail or things like S3 buckets, those are not in scope. They're covered by a different law. So you don't get out of compliance, but it's a different law. But for the CRA, it's like a physical or a digital item, and it is within the European Union by a European citizen. And then again, like many of our members, we have members in Asia and America and Europe and Africa. They all want to sell there. So again, those manufacturers need to be compliant with the law, even though they don't live there. One additional point, Europe was first, and they're very generally pretty progressive in writing the legislation. They're not going to be the last. We know that our friends in China and India and Australia and the UK are all thinking about similar legislation. In the US, we do things slightly differently. We tend to do more executive orders, or we'll write standards like through NIST, or we'll have like the Cyber Trust Mark program, which isn't a law, but it's something if you're going to sell to the government, you have to have the Cyber Trust Mark. But nations around the world are looking at the CRA and will be implementing similar rules. So even though, if you live and only sell in India, for example, it's just coming. It's just a couple of years down the road where India will enact their own CRA-style legislation, again, to protect the Indian consumers. And the same thing, Japan and Australia, New Zealand, everybody's like kind of looking at this.
No, that's good. I mean, Europe has, I used to look there. They have always, whether it's I'm just forgetting the name of one of the most, I'm just forgetting about the privacy.
GDPR.
GDPR,
Yeah.
and I still remember, that even when they put pictures there, the faces will blurred. Even the public places, they do focus a lot of privacy, which
Right.
can hinder innovation.
It can.
It does hinder innovation, but the problem is that if you let the industry grow too big, then it's too big to contain.
Mm-hmm.
If you start, then you contain too much for innovation. So you have to maintain the right balance somewhere. So I think that's what.
And it's spot on to your earlier point, how open source is the development model today.
Mm-hmm.
Well, organizations saw all this amazing free software with all this amazing functionality, and they didn't understand that it has a cost. It's not free to make that happen. And so they skewed more towards the innovation and and speed, as opposed to thinking about privacy and security. And this is kind of the pendulum is swinging back. And in Europe, the CRA is going to swing back pretty forcefully. And it needs to be a balance. You can have that speed and innovation and that kind of global contribution, and still making sure that you're protecting the end consumer, their privacy, their data, or the systems.
One thing I really love, when you're talking about that, it doesn't matter what is the size of your business, you should get involved, because that is one of the biggest. I've been covering open source from very early on. In early days, our goal was why you should use open source. Now, after 20 years, while everybody is using open source, but the problem remains the same. Back then, we used to say why you should use open source and why you should become a good open source citizen. Now, everybody is using open source, but not everybody is a good open source citizen.
Exactly.
So can you also stress a bit on the fact that while you can get the code for free, but there is a cost associated, and the best way to pay it by getting involved. Now, by getting involved, it's not just you. Of course, a smaller company may not have all the resources, but by getting involved, first of all, you actively know where the project is heading. First of all, number two is you. Like Linux kernel, you don't even know where it is on the Mars. It's in the middle, under the ocean.
It's everywhere.
So use cases are different. Now, I will not know your use case, but if you get involved, I will actually have some familiarity with the use case. So when the developers are writing the code, they will be back of the mind. So your use case will not be marginalized. So you will still benefit a lot from contributing. Don't contribute too much, but get involved. You can do documentation. I mean, contribution is not just about code. You can sponsor projects. You can sponsor shows like that. So can you just stress a bit on the benefit? It doesn't matter your size. You will get by getting involved.
And open source, unlike any other kind of development model, you have an oversized ability to influence. A single person can have a huge ability to influence a project. These maintainers will write the software for a lot of different reasons, but predominantly they're all trying to solve a problem, and they thought, this is useful for me, maybe other people will like it, so they kind of share it with the world. Well, you have the ability to kind of talk with the maintainer and say, I liked this, I didn't like that. Could you potentially think about this use case exactly as you said? Get your use cases, your requirements, noted, so that as the developer's making changes and doing updates, they will consider that. You also, open source has some of the greatest talented software engineers on the planet there. So you get the ability to kind of rub shoulders with them, interact with them, and learn and code with them. That's just an amazing experience for a developer to be able to have this, not exactly precise mentorship, but a lot of times it does lead to that. But you get the ability to interact with these great minds and help shape the course of where things are going.
Excellent. I remember when I talked to Linux, he said, I don't have any vision, for Linux. All these companies bring their vision.
Yep.
Everybody has their own vision.
Exactly.
I am here as a manager to just enable them to implement. So that is with the open source, there is no one agenda for this project. No, you bring your own, and this is the best. I think, unlike proprietors close, I have never seen where even the smaller member has so much power.
I know.
To influence the whole. I mean, good example is ARM. Because when ARM came in and no, but because of their resource requirement, now Intel benefit from the power efficiency.
Yes.
So you just never know what will, benefit the larger market. So just get involved, contribute.
And also open source is amazing that you get these thought leaders from these different spaces. So there will be meetings where ARM, AMD, Intel, and other chip vendors are in the same call.
This five and all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yes, they are fierce business competitors, but when you get to the technology that helps them ship product, they need to have that kind of neutral location to have that debate, have those conversations, and work standards out. So it benefits their organizations and all of their consumers as well.
And the benefit, the beauty of open source is that your sales and marketing team will fight, but your developers, they just, they don't even care which badge they are wearing.
Exactly.
They don't, and when I talk to, every time I talk, we still talk about the same topic. But the funny thing is that, 3 interviews before you're working with that company, then you change company, now you're working here. But the focus is still the same.
Exactly.
So that is the beauty of open source. It's as Jim says, it's positive sum game. Everybody wins. Do you think now we have everything?
I think that was good.
CRob, thank you so much. Once again, it was a great discussion.
Very welcome.
And I loved it because it was person versus last time it was remote. And this is a very important area, security. And security, unlike past, is not an afterthought. It's not any else's problem. It has become a board room discussion. CISOs are becoming. So this is an ongoing discussion. So I would love to chat with you again.
I would love that.
As CRA finds, it get expanded throughout the world. But I really appreciate the great insights. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. It was great.